people who think it's a great idea to put food in your gas tank, and gentlemen, ethanol is talked up in liberal and conservative circles, which is why I can't make this a refuting liberal talking points video, as one of the silver bullets to our energy problems created by our government, and when the government solves them, the result is much worse than if they'd done nothing. My contentions in this video are: 1. Ethanol is not cleaner despite what many say. It's actually a net drag on the environment. 2. The reason it may seem cheap is because it's subsidized, refiners get tax credits for refining it, and it's protected by tariffs, which could end up being counterproductive. Number 3, it's food for crying out loud. Number 4, it reduces your gas mileage and is not good for many older cars, lawnmowers, snowblowers, weed whackers, etc. Number 5, it's helping us cut back on crude oil consumption. It is not. Let's start with the first oft-repeated line: ethanol is cleaner. It is not cleaner. A 4-year study in Indonesia and Malaysia, where 85% of commercial palm oil is grown by a team from Wetlands International, Delft Hydraulics, and Altera Research Center of Wageningen University, details the environmental harm caused by the use of palm oil as an alternative energy source. The study found out that 1.4 billion tons of carbon dioxide go up in smoke every year from the rainforest fires set to clear new land for biofuel plantations. Another 600 million tons seeps into the air from drained peat swamps. That 2 billion tons of CO2 constitutes 8% of the Earth's total fossil fuel emissions, and also a forest is going to absorb more CO2 than a field of corn, for example, and then there will be no corn there in the winter. A study just published, actually this is a while ago, by Mark Jacobson, a Stanford University civil and environmental engineering professor, in the peer-reviewed journal Environmental Science and Technology, adds another consequence: that 200 more people would die each year from respiratory problems if all U.S. cars ran on ethanol. According to Jacobson, ethanol actually produces more hydrocarbons than gasoline and less nitrogen oxide. Ethanol produces longer-lasting chemicals that eventually turn into hydrocarbons spread over a larger area. The actual science is complicated, but in an area like LA, when nitrogen oxide reaches a certain level, it actually begins eating up some of the ozone. So less is bad, not good. The first rule of environmentalism, like medicine, should be to do no harm, or to put it in the terms the green weenies understand, are they destroying the earth in order to save it? Jacobson's research also found that E85 vehicles reduce atmospheric levels of two carcinogens, benzene and butadiene, but increase two others, formaldehyde and acetaldehyde. As a result, cancer rates for E85 are likely to be similar to those for gasoline. However, E85 significantly increased ozone, a prime ingredient of smog. In addition, the deleterious health effects of E85 will be the same whether the ethanol is made from corn, switchgrass, or other plant products. In 2007, the EPA admitted that increased use of ethanol in gasoline would increase emissions of key air pollutants, including volatile organic compounds and nitrogen oxides, by as much as 7%. In October, the agency again acknowledged that more ethanol consumption will mean higher emissions of key pollutants. That admission is driving environmental advocates like Frank O'Donnell, the president of Clean Air Watch, to distraction. On one hand, explains O'Donnell, the agency is saying that more ethanol will mean higher emissions of nitrogen oxides. Yet the ethanol bailout comes at a time when the EPA is setting much tougher standards on smog. Indeed, the EPA is implementing new rules on ground-level ozone that could affect dozens of cities. What contributes to the formation of ozone? You guessed it, nitrogen oxides. Donald Steelman, a professor emeritus of chemistry at the University of Denver, has been studying ethanol's impact on air quality for 2 decades. In a recent interview, he said that his assessment of the EPA's decision is much the same as O'Donnell's. More ethanol means worse air quality, period. He adds that corn ethanol doesn't do anything to reduce greenhouse gases. David Pimentel, a professor of ecology at Cornell University, who has been studying grain alcohol for 20 years, and Tad Patzek, an engineering professor at the University of California, Berkeley, co-wrote a report that estimates that making ethanol from corn requires 29% more fossil energy than the ethanol fuel itself actually contains. The two scientists calculated all the fuel inputs for ethanol production from the diesel fuel for the tractor planting the corn to the fertilizer put in the field to the energy needed at the processing plant, and found that ethanol is a net energy loser. According to their calculations, ethanol contains about 76,000 BTUs per gallon, but producing that ethanol from corn takes about 98,000 BTUs. For comparison, a gallon of gasoline contains about 116,000 BTUs per gallon, but making that gallon of gas from drilling the well to transportation through refining requires about 22,000 BTUs. In addition to their findings on corn, they determined that making ethanol from switchgrass requires 50% more fossil energy than the ethanol yields. Wood biomass 57% more, and sunflowers 118% more. The best yield comes from soybeans, but they too are a net loser, requiring 27% more fossil energy than the biodiesel fuel produced. In other words, more ethanol production will increase America's total energy consumption, not decrease it. That could go partially into number 5, my 5th point. It should be noted that there is a growing dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico due to increased use of fertilizer. The dead zone was discovered in 1985 and is at least 7,900 oxygen-depleted square miles large. Ethanol is not cleaner, folks. Sorry, green weenies. Number 2, ethanol victimized the taxpayer and has been doing so for decades. At one time, it had a 51 cent a gallon tax credit for refining this crap, and a 54-cent gallon tariff on foreign ethanol to protect Iowa and Nebraska's farmers from competition. The 54-cent tariff is still in place. Since then, the tax credit for refining it has been reduced to 45 cents. The U.S. spent about $7.7 billion subsidizing ethanol in just the last year. Slate reported in 2005 that between 1995 and 2003, ethanol subsidies went over $37 billion in the U.S., most of which took place in the Clinton-Gore administration. Consider that the ethanol mandate is scheduled to hit 36 billion gallons in 2020. You can guess that it will require more subsidies. It should come as no surprise to everyone that we now have a 15% requirement for ethanol blended with gasoline. More food in the gas tank, which will cause food price inflation, and more subsidies, to prop up an industry that will not survive on its own. Point number 3, it's food, for crying out loud. Consider, ethanol production this year will reportedly consume 41% of the U.S. corn crop and 15% of the global corn crop. The U.S. is one of the major corn exporters in the world. This means less food for poor people here and abroad, less money from those exports, and it's only going to get worse as we're not blending 15% of it with gasoline. We're now blending 15% of it with gasoline, and the mandate will hit 36 billion gallons in 2020. Thank you, George W. Bush and your Democrat Congress. This is not good, folks. Point number 4, ethanol reduces your gas mileage. While diesel fuel contains around 140,000 BTUs per gallon and gasoline 115,000 BTU, denatured ethanol contains only about 78,000 BTU per gallon. These numbers translate into low fuel mileage. For example, Consumer Reports tested a new Chevy Tahoe and found that in highway driving on 85% ethanol, gas mileage decreased from 21 to 15 miles per gallon. In city driving, it dropped from 9 to 7. In marked contrast, says John A. Baden, chairman of the Foundation for Research on Economics and the Environment, 2 old diesel ranch trucks that weigh a ton more than the new Tahoe each get over 20 plus miles per gallon on the highway at 65 miles an hour. If you have a brand new vehicle that can handle E85, your mileage will be significantly reduced, in contrast to putting conventional gasoline with no ethanol in it in your vehicle. E85 is so corrosive a traditional pipeline can't transport it. Imagine what it will do to your engine, which brings me to this. For years, ethanol blended gasoline has forced boat owners to pay for expensive repairs to their boats' fuel lines and tanks. And that was with gasoline containing just 10% ethanol. There are 500 million non-road engines, think lawnmowers, chainsaws, and weed whackers, now in use in America, and none of these engines is designed to run on fuel containing more than 10% ethanol. If you're one of America's working poor with an older car, I don't think your engine will handle gasoline with 15% ethanol in it. Neither would your snowblower. Last point, number 5, ethanol is curtailing our consumption of evil oil. Between 1999 and 2009, U.S. ethanol production increased sevenfold to more than 700,000 barrels per day. But during that same time period, U.S. imports actually increased by more than 800,000 barrels per day. Furthermore, and perhaps most surprising, is this. During that same time period, U.S. oil exports, yes, exports, more than doubled to some 2 million barrels per day. Data from the U.S. Energy Information Administration show that in the last decade, oil imports closely tracked U.S. oil consumption. As U.S. oil demand grew, imports grew. When consumption fell, imports dropped. Ethanol production levels had no apparent effect on oil imports or consumption. Ethanol is not cleaner, it is not greener, it is not cheap. It is going to contribute to higher food prices. Many older engines can't tolerate it and has to go by truck because it's so corrosive, although someday I surmise they will build a pipeline that can tolerate it. Going by truck and not having a pipeline also increases costs for transport to areas that aren't in the Midwest. Ethanol significantly reduces your fuel mileage, and it's not putting a dent in our consumption of oil. However, it will put a dent in your wallet. If Chuck Grassley and Tom Harkin have an ounce of sense, and I won't hold my breath, they will let these ethanol subsidies lapse, scuttle the mandates for refinement, and make it compete in the free market. And lastly, you all may remember Uncle Albert Gore, while he was vice president, breaking a tie on the Senate floor on a bill. One of Louisiana's Democrat senators had proposed an amendment to take out the 10% ethanol mandate out of an energy bill. The opposition attempted to table it. It was 50-50. Al Gore voted yes to table that amendment and thus make the 10% ethanol mandate law. Now Al Gore is going back and say, well, I only supported ethanol because of farmers in Tennessee and farmers in Iowa, because the first caucus is in Iowa. And I think the first caucus should not be in Iowa, or they should have several other states on the same day, because everybody's got to come in here and worship ethanol. And you've got to lick boots and kiss rear ends and all that stuff for this garbage. And that's part of the reason ethanol has become such a big thing. If you don't come to Iowa and worship ethanol, you won't do well, and you probably won't become president. So Al Gore with a major flip-flop. He voted for that it was pure politics, had nothing to do with the environment. He basically admitted that now. So thank you, Uncle Albert Gore. You are an idiot. Have a nice day, and if someone starts talking up ethanol to you, now you've got some facts to refute them. Have a nice day, and don't thank me now.